Good morning. Today is March 2nd, 2021, and it is almost the 1-year anniversary of the tornado that came through Lebanon and took out my training facility. And I'm recording this video to kind of reflect on the last year. Things have changed quite a bit from where I was last year. Last year at this point, everything was focused on doing training. I was still traveling quite a bit, and of course had my own training facility and had built some pretty cool technology items that I was using for training, including a mini factory and some other pretty cool things from my background in machine building. And now it's a year later, and I'm headed from my home in Lebanon, Tennessee to Knoxville, Tennessee, which is a little over 2 hours away. And I'm back into the systems integration mode a little bit. So, since last year, I created a website called the Automation Academy, and that's coming along well. I released it in November, and have some members there where I still do training. And of course I do some individual training and still teach PLC classes when I get a chance, PLC and HMI classes, but a lot of that work has kind of disappeared. So I'm back to doing consulting and systems integration jobs, and one of them in particular is in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where I'm headed right now. It's been very interesting. Back in January, I went out to this place, and it is a food products manufacturer, and they make, among other things, they make soup, and it is in bag form. They cook it, and they put it in about 5-pound bags, and I did a course, actually a video and a write-up based on this automation feasibility study that I'm doing there called Mastering the Machine. And that course is available on my Automation Academy site, and I kind of walk students through the process of doing a feasibility study and the discovery part of automation jobs, analyzing jobs for feasibility and what it's going to take to do this type of automation. And in this case, it's going to involve some robotics and machine vision, both of which I don't have courses on at the Automation Academy yet, but certainly plan on doing some work in that area. As a matter of fact, yesterday, actually maybe day before yesterday, this weekend, I wired my camera cables back into one of my trainers for some machine vision work, and I plan on putting some of these bags of soup under the cameras and taking a look at what it's going to take to orient the bags. That's part of the feasibility part of this, is can the bags be picked up robotically oriented, or can they be descrambled using some other method? In addition to going to the plant where they make the product this morning, where I'll spend a couple of hours talking to the VP of operations there, who's engaged me for this project, in addition to that, I'm going to go to some old contacts that I had. This company was started by a mentor of mine, Tom Nall. Back in 1996 was when I also started my own first company. And Tom Nall taught me much of what I know about building machinery. Now, Tom has since sold his company to a company called Brown Machine, and there is a engineer who works there. He's now the engineering manager. His name is Don Brown, and no relation to Brown Machine. But Don Brown has offered to meet with me on talking about the descrambling part of this application, which descrambling would be taking these bags of soup as they're dumped into a bin and somehow sorting them. So basically separating them and orienting them so that they can be packed into the box that I show in the Mastering the Machine course. So the bags weigh about 5 pounds apiece. They are liquid, so they're a little bit awkward to handle. We're thinking in terms of possibly picking them up with vacuum and orienting them and setting them into a box. So today, one of the things I hope to get from this manufacturer is a box with 4 of the bags of liquid inside so that I can do some vision work and show them to Don Brown at All Automation Systems and talk about the descrambling process. In addition, they do some robotic work. They recently bought a robotics company, so we'll see what they have to offer. But I'm kind of fortunately in the driver's seat on this project, so who I present this to and who I bring into the project is a bit of my decision, which of course is going to be based on what's best for the customer, but also I will be able to use a lot of this material as I create more Mastering the Machine videos for the Automation Academy. I met last time I came here with another old contact of mine, a guy I actually went to college with, another electrical engineer. His name is Brandon Ellis, and he owns a company called Elitech. Elitech also does robotics and has pre-configured robotic stands and also does some machine vision work. So they're another company that I have the option of bringing into this project. So this is a very fortunate situation for both the customer and myself. Knoxville, Tennessee happens to be my old stomping grounds. It's where I owned my company for 10 years. So I have a lot of these contacts in that area. And this company just happened to call me, of all people, even though I'm 150 miles away or so. They found me on the internet and they called me up and asked if I could help them do this feasibility study, which is kind of good timing, right? Because I do need something to do besides teaching classes. So that's kind of how I ended up back in the systems integration sphere. It's not that I'm migrating from training. I still hope to teach wherever I can. Most of my classes, I've done one automation training class. It was a control logics class about several weeks ago, I guess, maybe a month ago. And that was in a hotel, and we were all socially distanced, right? We set up the trainers on tables, and all of the students had their own trainer and their own laptop, and did their work, a 4-day class, and then all went home, and everybody was COVID-free. But that is the only multi-person class I've had this year. Whereas, of course, a year ago, I was doing this probably 2 to 3 times every month, and now these classes are kind of few and far between. So I'm back into a little bit of the systems integration area. Of course, I'm still creating material for my Automation Academy, which is an online method of doing training. In addition, I've picked up a few individual students. This is only marginally profitable for me. I basically break even if I get a student for a day. And I've had one student who is building dust collection systems for buildings, for factories and that sort of thing. And I taught him how to, a little bit about PLC programming and panel design. He already knew some AutoCAD, but he needed help with all of the how do you spec components and things like that. So he's actually appearing on my webinar, which I do every 2 weeks. He's appearing on the webinar this Friday, and he's going to talk about this dust collection system and how he's learned how to build the control system for it. They used to farm out all of their controls. His father actually started the company, and his father knows a lot about metal forming, sheet metal and that sort of thing, which really applies to the ductwork of these dust collection systems. But like I said, they always farmed out the controls, and this student is the father's son, and has decided to do this controls project himself. He's doing a great job on it. It's got a 100 horsepower drive on it, and a little 5 horsepower and a 3 horsepower drive, and he's going to talk about all of that this Friday. So that's going to be really interesting. Of course, that's all recorded, and I post those usually on YouTube and at the Automation Academy. Now, I've been told that I'm kind of giving away too much material and that people don't have as much incentive to join the Automation Academy because I put all of my webinars on YouTube and that sort of thing. And I'm taking that under advisement. I may need to start chopping those up and maybe put a teaser on YouTube instead of putting the whole webinar there, because there actually is quite a bit of information that people can learn about creating systems, and I should probably be incorporating that into my business model. I do tend to probably just give away information a little too randomly. Because of that, I don't make enough to actually profit in this business sometimes. So that's something I need to work on. It's interesting, I mentioned in the last little retrospective when I recorded driving that I'm not very good at certain things related to business, and one of them is, I suppose, advertising and differentiating what I should be giving away and what I should be selling. I don't know that I'm the ideal business owner. It's interesting because some of the people in the Automation Academy have asked for advice on owning a business, and I certainly know how to do the technical part of the business, and I know a lot of the, I guess, bookkeeping and accounting, and I know a lot about advertising, even though I don't necessarily do it properly. I know a lot about web recording and creating videos and that sort of thing. So I can be helpful in those areas, and of course I have an area in the Automation Academy where I promote that and let people know that, hey, you know, if you are starting an entrepreneurial venture, if nothing else, I can tell you a lot about the mistakes that I've made over the last, how long has it been now? 24 years that I have, most of which I've been in business for myself. From 1996 to 2006, I owned a machine building company. We started out in my garage, literally the way a lot of companies start their businesses, and I started out building control panels in my garage, and then branched out, moved into a little office, hired my first employee, and started doing some PLC programming. I got into this business actually selling components to start with. I first started working for a distributor that sold Eagle Signal PLCs, the EPTAC controllers, and the Micro 190, and he happened to have a DOS tutorial on programming the Micro 190. So I learned a lot about my PLC programming from this guy who hired me in straight out of school in 1994. And then, of course, selling PLCs and timers. At the time, they were mechanical timers, Eagle signal timers. And then I also went to a lot of the Omron training schools. And Omron, of course, makes PLCs, and went to school and learned how to program the C200H and CV series of PLCs, and learned about sensors. Went to various manufacturer schools. I would recommend that to just about anyone who really wants to learn about all the components that go into automated systems. That's a great way to get started. If you can work for a distributor or a manufacturer's rep, they will send you to schools. So I went to a lot of the Omron schools in Atlanta, and have some great memories of doing that before I started my business. And then also went to Pepperell and Fuchs School up in Cleveland, learned about intrinsic safety barriers, and did some traveling around in their demo van, which had lots of sensors and devices in it. That was a pretty neat company to learn about. And then went to work for the Allen Bradley distributor in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is where, again, I'm headed right now. And they sent me up to Milwaukee to their distributor school, and I worked in sales for them for about a year, and then became a technical specialist and covered their vision systems and discrete components like motor starters and soft starts, things like that. Allen Bradley distributors are forced to hire engineers to support their products. So at that time, there were already PLC support guys, and there was already a drives and motion control support guy. And so I got the third area, which included at the time machine vision. So that's kind of how I got into the vision systems and things. Learned about that. At the time, Allen Bradley had a system called the Pyramid Integrator system, PLC 5 based, big, large rack system. And I thought that was pretty cool and very high tech at the time. Of course, technology has moved on a lot since that time. That was in about 1994, 1995 time frame. In 1996, as I mentioned, I started my own business in my garage and moved out too quickly. I moved into an office and hired somebody, and very quickly put myself into debt, which is not something that I would suggest to anybody starting a business. If you can start a business without any debt, that's the ideal way to do it. I like to think that if I would have just waited another 6 months or so and worked out of my garage, I wouldn't have run up the debt that I ran up, which I kept all 10 years that I was in business. I had some kind of revolving debt. And that's a tough way to run business because you're always scrambling to pay that back. And I never really did. Even after I closed the business, I had a little bit left to pay off. I was very fortunate that after 10 years, I had learned a lot about machine building and controls and that sort of thing, and was able to land a very good job with a large custom machine builder in Nashville, which was how I ended up moving back there. And worked for Wright Industries for 6 years. And in 2012, decided to go back out on my own. And I've been working as automation consulting since 2012, but this time I did it the smart way. I did not go into debt. I did not hire anyone, and pretty quickly went from contracting and doing systems integration only into also teaching. And that's how I got into doing PLC training for Automation Training, a company up in Canada, and learned how to teach classes of people. And then opened my own facility in 2016 moved out of a little shared office that I had in downtown Nashville and moved into my training facility in 2016. And I was really proud of that facility. I had built it into a really cool training place with machine vision and my little imitation factory. And then full circle, here it is 1 year ago since a tornado came through that facility, dead center. I was on the dead middle path of that tornado, and it completely destroyed the building that I was in. I was able to rescue some components, but the mini factory was gone. A lot of my vision equipment was gone. I did manage to rescue a few cameras and some miscellaneous components, but to ever replace all of that is going to cost a lot. And as I mentioned, I'm not willing to go into debt anymore. Fortunately, I've managed to get ahead of the curve in that area and run my business on a good budget. But I've had to migrate, obviously, from doing training to now doing training and systems integration and consulting. Now, the good side of that is I'm getting involved in some really cool projects. This one that I'm going out to Knoxville for is one of those really cool projects. It's one of the more interesting applications I've ever been involved with. It's probably worth multiple millions of dollars if it's done completely. Now, I'm not sure. I think this customer could probably afford to do some pretty big things. They are a huge facility, and they do quite a bit of business. They have a giant 10-story tall storage and retrieval system that's all frozen for frozen goods. So they take these bags of soup out of these blast freezers and they package them into boxes and bring them out on pallets and store them in this 10-story tall giant storage and retrieval system. So I figure if they can afford to build such a huge system like that, they can probably afford to automate some of these processes also, which again would involve probably using robotics and machine vision to put the bags in the boxes, then take the boxes and somehow get the boxes into the freezers. And I've looked at various ways of doing that. Probably the most cost-effective way is to use just overhead conveyors, which saves a lot of space also. You can put the conveyors over the traffic in the hallways and things like that, and then transport them to the freezer areas, and then probably upload using a vertical elevator type conveyor, and then bring them on overhead conveyors, and then download them in the freezer area, and then somehow get them into the blast freezers. The problem with these blast freezers, the big problem that they actually called me about, was the racks that they set all these boxes on full of soup. They stack them on the shelves of the rack, and then they manually push these racks into the freezer. So they push them from this load area where they load the boxes all the way down the hall into the freezers, and their problem is labor. They go through a lot of employees because it's really just a physically, I think, difficult job to push these carts around and push them into the freezers and then pull them out of the freezers and de-box them, right? De-palletize, if you want to call it that, the boxes off of the shelves and put bands on them, and then palletize them, put them on pallets, and bring the pallets into that big storage and retrieval system. So there's a lot of manual labor in material handling, just taking these boxes and putting them on the racks, bringing the racks into the freezers, and then bringing the racks out of the freezers, and taking the boxes off of the racks. So a lot of that could be done without the racks, if they insist on using racks, if they find that to be most cost effective, then it's probably going to be some kind of AGV, automated guided vehicle. I've done a lot of research on AGVs lately. Neat website that I found while doing this is something called AGV Network. It turns out to be a guy in Italy who does kind of aggregates all the information about AGVs and automated guided carts and that sort of thing. And even though he's in Italy, he provides information on a lot of European and American and Japanese companies and kind of puts it all in one place. So in a way, I think he's in the same business I am, is doing things online and trying to create online income, which is kind of where the Automation Academy idea came from. So this has been a kind of a stream of consciousness video, if you want to call it that, talking about my projects and the Automation Academy and my history all together. But, I do this for myself as much as I do it for other people, and just to extract some of this information and put it on the Academy site. I never know what it's going to look like when I look back at it and review it. Sometimes I chop these things up and I put little snippets of my stream of consciousness videos into things like the Mastering the Machine course. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mastering the Machine course itself. The first module of the course I did based on this application that I just described. I thought it's a very good idea to start out by talking about how projects like this come about from the very, very beginning, when the customer goes and finds somebody like me to help them put together some ideas and feasibility studies and things, and then writing a report like I did. And of course that's available at the Automation Academy as part of that module. I kind of genericized it. I took the customer name out, and of course the person's name that I meet with here in Knoxville. But I did talk about some of the different vendors that I knew in Knoxville and were helping me evaluate this job without getting into too much detail. So the next Mastering the Machine module, which I will probably use a little bit of the content from this little talk that I'm having here, will involve more of the quoting process and how do we put together pricing, which is obviously part of the feasibility. Can they afford to do the job? And what part of the job do they want to attack first? So the person I'm seeing today, that's part of what he wanted to accomplish today, is take all the ideas that I presented in the feasibility study and shoot holes in some of them and try to narrow things down. What things do we want to attack? And he was pretty intrigued by my overhead conveyor and upstacking and downstacking idea, and he seemed pretty intrigued with the robotic box loading also. But I have a feeling the box loading is going to be somewhat expensive. I've looked at some of the robotic solutions, and one in particular I've been using, Rethink Robotics, to do some studies for picking up bags and things like that, and been in communication with them. I happen to have a student that is also like the guy I mentioned with the dust collection system. This student has bought a robot, and he's a company owner, and he wants to fill containers full of a powdered substance using these powder fillers, and use the robot to put them in boxes and fill them and do various things with that. It's very interesting. Again, just like the other student I have that I'm doing the webinar with this week, this guy wants to learn about everything related to industrial automation, right? So he's starting from scratch. He knows how to run a business, and he knows about these supplements and things like that, but he wants to learn about automation, which kind of falls into my training wheelhouse, right? But it also kind of falls into the systems integration wheelhouse, because there are so many things that go into putting together a system like that, a robotic filling system or a palletizing or depalletizing system. And some of his ideas, like right now, I think he's talking about the robot literally holding a container while the filler fills it and then setting it into a box or something. And I'm not sure that's always the best use of a robot, right? The robot's kind of wasting time if it's not moving. So if it's just sitting there while you're filling, you're not using the robot as efficiently as you could. So some of the things that I'm going to talk to him about are, why do we use things like conveyors and line up containers in a row and then fill the containers with the automated filler, and right, it's at a fixed height above the container and it just cranks out its product and things like that, and we can use the robot for some more efficient uses, right? Like certainly palletizing and depalletizing is something that robots are pretty good at. And if you can keep the robot constantly moving, that's a wise use of its time. So there's a lot that's going to go into that training also. Things like time studies, right? To prove that the robot is being used most efficiently, if we do a timing chart, we can actually say, okay, how long does it take this robot to do these operations? And, here's a dead space where the robot's just sitting there holding something and it's filling for 10 seconds or 15 seconds or however long it takes to fill. That's a waste of 15 seconds of the robot's time, whereas it could just be sitting there on a passive conveyor doing the filling. So that's some of the things that we want to talk about when I do this training. So as I mentioned, I've been getting more kind of one-off systems integration students rather than just PLC programming students over the last few months. This year, I've had the two kind of custom students that I mentioned here, and I've also had a student from a plant who is their new controls engineer, and he, of course, already knew some things about PLC programming, and he's done machine maintenance before. He comes from a maintenance background. But this student needed to learn how to actually program a PLC, which normal classes, people don't realize this, but they talk about a PLC programming class. There are almost no PLC programming classes out there. Now, that sounds odd for me to say that, but a programming class means writing a program from scratch. And normally, PLC classes really just describe how do these timers work, right? On an Allen Bradley PLC or a Siemens PLC. How do I use the PLC to search for code that's already been written rather than writing my own code? That's most of the classes that I teach that are multi-person classes, right? I don't usually teach people how to write a program from scratch because, for one thing, everybody's program would be a little bit different, right? They all have different things that they manufacture in their plants, and while there are some generic things that I can teach people about building, auto sequences and things like that, it's hard to concentrate specifically on the type of machine that they want to write code for. So that's where I get these individual students. The other thing is, most companies, I think, are training probably maintenance people more than they're training their design engineers. I think they think that design engineers already know how to write programs, and that's sometimes true. A lot of people are self-taught, and until they have seen literally hundreds of other people's programs, I don't know that people necessarily have rigorously codified how to form a program. They're learning from what they've seen, and until my book, Advanced PLC Hardware and Programming, I don't think there were really any books that addressed how does industry format a program. How does industry organize things as far as input routines and output routines and auto sequences and all of the things that people do see in all these other programs, but nobody's really codified. So I did put that in my book. I organized the book by having an introductory generic PLC section where I do talk about what are timers and counters and how do they work. And then the middle section of the book was the advanced techniques. You notice me looking around here. Of course, I'm driving, so there's sometimes things on the side of the road that kind of catch my attention. It's almost like having ADHD. It's a squirrel, Anyway, so I did organize the book that way. I put the advanced portion in the middle, and then at the end of the book, the last third of the book, I talk about specific platforms of PLCs, in particular Allen Bradley and Siemens, and I talk about the different types of PLCs that are in those families. So, for instance, both Allen Bradley and Siemens have a register-based PLC, the RS Logix 500 in the case of Allen Bradley, which uses registers for integers and bits and things like that, and then Siemens Step 7 platform, which again uses the M registers and data blocks and things like that. And then both also have tag-based systems. And so I put a lot of the hardware information, that's why I call it PLC hardware and programming, and made it specific to Allen Bradley and Siemens. And then, of course, talked about some of the advanced techniques and methods of forming a program in the middle section. So that's what that book's all about. And I use that as the basis for my PLC classes when I do teach one-on-one PLC training. One of the problems I've had when teaching these one-off type classes is, as I mentioned, I basically break even if I have a student for one day like that. And at the same time, where I consider that a low-priced offering, they would consider it, an individual trying to pay for a class like that would say, well, that's pretty expensive, right? To pay for myself, I charge $600 a day, and that's, like I said, pretty break even for me. But $600 a day for a student, if you took a 4-day class and you had to pay for it yourself, $2,400 for a 4-day class is a pretty big outlay. I've only had 2 or 3 students in the past that could afford to pay that kind of cost for just a class, right? And in their case, they were all kind of trying to be either systems integrators, or one guy had been in maintenance for 24 years and was moving to a different city and was leaving his job and was just worried that he didn't know enough about PLCs to impress another company, to hire him possibly into a different job than just maintenance, right? Maybe he wanted to move into design a little bit, so he took my custom class for that reason. But yeah, my training, on a one-on-one basis can be pretty expensive. Now, at the same time, for companies paying for things, $600 a day is pretty cheap to get what I would call design and consulting services. So a company paying for training in the guise of consulting, that's a pretty good deal. So, for instance, this thing that I'm doing here, I've kind of priced it almost as a training day, even though I only spend about 2 hours probably with a customer today, and then I'll move on and go talk to my old friends at Null Automation Systems. That's a pretty good deal for a big manufacturer like this, right? So that's maybe how I get in the door on some of these consulting jobs, is I charge the equivalent of a training day for this exploratory work. Now, at the same time, I am going to give this customer my rate sheet, which is my formal pricing that I should be charging, right, on an hourly basis for consulting work or even programming work and just sitting at my desk and writing reports and things like that. Really, that's what if I want to make a profit as a business, that's what I should be charging. And of course, I'm giving him this rate sheet, and then he's going to have to make his decisions later if they want to start retaining me for full days of work instead of just these kind of one-off days. I enjoy doing these one-off things. I think it's a lot of fun to go into a plant and see what they do. I did some exploratory work, consulting work for Hyster-Yale. They make forklifts. Did that a few years ago and traveled around a few of their different plants and saw what they do, and then wrote a big report, kind of like I did here, for automation feasibility study. Let's see, another company that I did some of that for when I was at Wright Industries was Kimberly-Clark. Traveled around to all their different manufacturing facilities in North Carolina and Georgia and Mexico and different places, and saw how they were making a specific product, and then wrote up a very long and detailed report on the feasibility of building some machinery. And again, I was at Wright Industries, so I had a lot of support. In my case, I was evaluating just the controls side, and I had a mechanical engineer that I was working with side by side. But we were kind of chosen because we were cross-disciplinary guys. I know machine building, and the mechanical side also, and he knew quite a bit about controls. He'd been in industry and about business for a long time, so we were kind of chosen for that particular application to go out and do those studies. And then I want to say, I don't think it was Doug Allward, but Doug Allward was the guest on a couple of my webinars, Mastering the Machine webinars for the Automation Academy, and he talked about quoting and how some of these projects are put together from the feasibility study area, and actually putting together the formal quotes. So he wasn't involved with that. I think his compatriot, I believe there were two senior application engineers at Wright Industries, and I think the other guy was involved in this particular project. I forget the other guy's name, but he was another very smart senior guy who knew a lot about putting together quotes and feasibility studies and the write-ups. So that was another project that I was involved doing. Very similar things to what I'm doing here as far as the feasibility studies. But so I am into Knoxville now, headed into the west side of town here, and I've probably got another 10 or 15 minutes till I'm at the plant. Let's see, currently coming up on 9:30 local time, so I'm right on time. I'm going to go show up to the customer. My appointment time there is 10 o'clock, and we'll probably spend from 10 a.m. until about noon going through, and I'll probably take some more video and more pictures, and we will, as I mentioned, shoot some holes in the ideas that I've come up with, right? Especially some of the AGV things. Turns out, AGVs are pretty expensive, and it would take a whole lot of AGVs to move their carts around inside of these freezers and things. So we'll probably shoot holes in those pretty quickly, which will maybe help justify a lot of these overhead conveyor ideas that I have for the plant. I would really love to see if we could somehow put a loading and unloading conveyor system right in the freezers instead of using these carts. But the problems that I see there is, you have to get into those freezers and clean things and defrost things, and to have enough room for human beings to move around and get in amongst the conveyors and do the cleaning. It's a food facility, so things have to be pretty sanitary. And when you start putting, belt conveyors, roller conveyors, things like that, it's really hard sanitize that stuff. You first have to defrost it, which is a whole different thing, and then you got to get in there and clean, whether it's belts or rollers or whatever. So that's some of the ideas that we're going to have to, shoot holes in. But gee, wouldn't it be nice if you just had full, bunch of conveyors already in the freezers, and you could just kind of load boxes from the front, bring them to the back. But then you got to figure out a way to sanitize all that stuff, and that's, I think, where part of the challenge is going to be for putting all this equipment in there. And there is where the AGVs and the carts come in. So they're in a bit of a dilemma too, right? How do you do this, automate these processes without having problems with either employees pushing carts into things or loading boxes or whatever. But anyway, so sorry for all the random skipping from topic to topic, but that's kind of what I do in these little videos that I put together. I try to multitask and record things and reflect on things while I'm driving. So that's kind of where all this comes from. For anyone who watches this, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to put this yet, but I hope you got something out of this. As I said, I do, because I take these apart and I put them into little snippets of videos that I use in different things in the Automation Academy. I am going to make my sales pitch now for those of you who've heard a little more about the Automation Academy. It is a website that concentrates on teaching industrial automation topics. There is a lot there on PLC and HMI programming, that sort of thing. I plan to create a lot more material on machine vision, quite a bit on systems integration, how are machines quoted, how do we put together system design ideas and things. I'll have things in there on probably CAD and design later also. But again, it's just me creating all this material for the Automation Academy. So things kind of come out a little bit haphazardly and scattered. I'll put some things on Mastering the Machine, and I'll continue my Odyssey series on the different PLC platforms. I'm creating a machine vision write-up right now on basically just what is machine vision, trying to keep it very generic. That's going in there very, very soon. Of course, we do webinars every 2 weeks. We do a webinar called Mastering the Machine, and I am planning on putting little teasers on YouTube, but I'm probably going to keep most of the content of those webinars now on the Automation Academy site itself. I would encourage anyone who gets a chance to join the Automation Academy. It is a very cost-effective solution. It is only $9.99 a month for the basic membership, which allows you to look at a lot of the videos and download a lot of good written material, a lot of stuff I've got on there. And then for $29.99 a month, again, pretty inexpensive, you get access to everything, including all the PLC training videos and the systems integration videos and all the documents and the downloads. There is a community where I have interest groups on different topics and also by company. So I'm talking to Under Armour, for instance, right now about a membership, and they've mentioned having up to 60 people join and be able to get training and watch the videos and things. We're still kind of talking about what form that would take. It's 3 different plants, so how do we format things such that people from 3 different locations can access all this information, and what should I create that is useful for their particular plant. Now, the cool thing about Under Armour is they do this storage and retrieval, again, pretty similar to probably the way Amazon works. So putting things on there that pertain to automation, storage, and retrieval, they use a lot of pneumatic storage and retrieval systems. So things that pertain to their maintenance people when it comes to automation related to storage and retrieval, control logics in particular, Alan Bradley. That's the kind of material I'll put on there. But I'm at 50 minutes on this video right now, even though I will chop it up later. So I am going to call it a wrap here. I'm probably a mile from my exit at this point to go talk to the folks at this plant, and I'll record maybe an update later on what I got out of this, and certainly will become more fodder for the Mastering the Machine series, and there will be some more generic write-ups concerning this, since this is an ongoing project. It's been great talking to everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much.